discussion about hot rod engines, and I know that Frank Marino wasn't happy because the guitars were on stands and they're lining the only walkway, into the back room that you could go. So I'm stumbling back and forth, and Frank Marino saw me like almost trip over a couple guitars, and he sort of like pointed at me. Now, he was very much a gentleman. He said, "We got Heineken here and food over there. Why don't you stay over here and not walk through this area where the guitars are at?" So I was pretty grateful that he didn't bang on me too much or kick me out from backstage. But that was kind of a nice night, and he was a really, like here again, he was a real gentleman. But I guess one of the like most significant introductions made was with Carlos Santana, and on my birthday, it was here again, it was accidental. We have a friend from Annapolis, Maryland, who's pretty famous at this point. There's like Paul Reed Smith, who makes guitars, and anybody out there wonders who he is or what he's about. He's probably the premier guitar maker of the modern age. He's taken what I would say he's taken Les Paul's place as the premier guitar player and guitarist of our time. Paul Reed Smith has his own band, and I grew up with him. I grew up with him in Annapolis. He worked on my guitars before he was famous. I worked on my guitars before he making $60 million a year selling guitars worldwide. And on my 33rd birthday, we were at Meriwether Post Pavilion with a mutual friend, and we saw when the lights came up at Santana, Paul jumped on stage and started to work on Carlos's guitars. And we ran down and we said, "Hi, Paul, how you doing?" And he said, "Stay right there." And what we did is we stood outside, the gate that separated the fans from the from the backstage, and he brought us backstage to meet Carlos and the band. Carlos was very much a gentleman again. He signed a nice piece of paper for me. Now, this is one of the funniest things I ever saw, and I saw it again when we did the Thunderbirds, was that a woman wanted to get on the tour bus so bad that she had jumped on the back of a roadie and was beating the living heck out of this guy. And I've seen this with fame that seems to mesmerize some women to the point of no return. And this was one of these things where they were telling her she couldn't get on the tour bus, she couldn't go back to the hotel, and she had wrapped both legs, she jumped on somebody's back, wrapped both legs around this gentleman, and was beating him about the head and neck until two other big guys could pull her off. And that's about that time I ran up with Carlos and I got him to sign that Xerox piece of paper with the backstage passes on it, shook his hand and said goodnight. But, I've seen, it's something about fame and fortune that does something to people. I'm not one of those people, I understand that these people have a job to do. They're not deities, they're regular human beings. And a lot of my friends are musicians. I consider myself a musician. I play guitar. And, I have a lot of respect. There was an incident where we took the fabulous Thunderbirds, and they were kind of a blues rock about the mid-'80s. They had a song, a hit, Tough Enough, and they played the wine festival in Annapolis, and our job was to drive them in the limo back to the hotel. And there was a woman vending wine most of the day, a married woman. She's quite attractive, blonde. And let me tell you, the window was about halfway up, and she managed to get half of her body into that limousine with the window about halfway up. She squeezed herself trying to get to the musicians, and she had to be pulled out by her feet from her husband and her friends. And she had a look in her eye that just I found pretty unbelievable. So that was kind of a funny incident. And the other people that I've made contact with over the years is Blue Oyster Cult, and they're probably my favorite people in the whole world. They were online before most rock bands were online. They had their own AOL chat area, and they communicated with fans. And you could email Donald Rozier, who goes under Buck Dharma, or Eric Bloom, and they would respond. So I got to be pretty good friends with Buck Dharma through the internet, And whenever he played Florida, I would arrange to meet him somewhere on the side of the stage or backstage, and he would sign records for me, or something. I've got 2 albums right here he signed for me, and he signed a T-shirt for me. Great guy. I can't say enough about him. He's probably one of the nicest people in rock and roll, and I've seen numerous stories of him doing charitable work for sick kids and other people that, he's just done nice things for people, him and his wife, Sandy. They're some of the greatest people around, and they build themselves as on tour forever, and I don't think they'll ever stop playing until they're finally 6 feet under, and God bless them. They're the best. I really do think a lot about them.
I really admire their work. Their early stuff, especially to Veteran of 1,000 Psychic Wars, and then, of course, Joan Crawford Has Risen from the Grave. Those are songs that I'd listen to over and over again when they came out. Those were some of my favorite albums.
Yeah, they really are. And they just recently did two gigs. So they recently played the album Agent of Fortunes, the entire album in its entirety, and the order of the songs on the album. One of the Brochured brothers, I'm not sure if it was Joe or Alan, came back to the band, who had been away for like some 30 years, has rejoined the band, so now they can do a lot of cuts off of the Agents of Fortune album that they couldn't have done back in the day, because I guess whatever vocals the Brochured brothers brought to the table for that particular album, there was a couple of cuts on there that they felt they couldn't do justice without those vocals, and they just completed earlier this year. They just did 2 gigs, and I wish I could remember where they were, but they also are on pay-per-view. So if you go and you Google the Blue Oyster Cult Agent of Fortune shows, I believe they were recorded and they're being sold on satellite. And I'd say that's a real treat, because that's the album, of course, with Don't Fear the Reaper on it, that huge monster hit where everybody says, "More cowbell, please." So I'd say, that's a real dandy right there. That's a really good thing to see. I haven't rented it yet, but if I get a chance to get it streamed or something, I probably will. A couple other people. I've met Robbie Krieger of the Doors at a record show. He was a guest there. And that was in, I want to say, 1999. And back then, he's still around. He's still playing. He's still playing festivals. But back then, he didn't look. I was really concerned about his health when I met him. He just didn't look like he was, all there. He looked like he was much older than he really was. It seems that he's made it through the years. That was like, what are we talking about, 16, 17 years ago, and he's still going strong. So God bless him. He's still out there. And, so, I've been lucky. I've met a few people. I got to say, I have never met anybody. I've got to say that there's total jerk. So the closest to being obnoxious might have been the fabulous Thunderbirds, Ken Simmons. I think they thought a little bit more of themselves than they really were, but, they're kind of on their way out when we had them at the wine festival. But everybody else has been just super, really nice people, and they usually just drop everything, to sign an autograph or meet a fan. And, it's good to see that just these people are great. They know who pays the bills, and of course, like a band like Blue Oyster Cult, Eric Bloom recently said in an interview, or maybe not so recently, that they're realizing more money now playing small clubs, like 300 nights or 275 nights out of the year, than they did back in the 70s when they were super big, and they trailed that laser light show. I don't know if you remember that, when Godzilla was a big hit.
Mm-hmm.
They had a great big laser light show, and Eric went on to say that they had like 4 huge 18-wheel trucks to take them from town to town with that laser light show, an enormous road crew, and just the expense of putting that up night after night, like, just ran them like out of money. In other words, they hardly realized the sort of money that they're realizing now, playing a small club for say $4,000 or $5,000 a night. So I think that's interesting that, a band that big, and if you remember that Agents of Fortune was followed by Spectres, and then I think Joan Crawford was either on that one album with Burning for You, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and then it made it to the live album, and that's probably the definitive version. And during that period of time, they were trailing this major, huge, entourage along. And he went on to explain that they didn't really realize the kind of money you would have thought they were making because everybody had their hand out. They had to get paid. So, I thought that was interesting. So, that's, just some of the people I've met. And like I said, everybody musically has been really nice in hospital. It's good to see that people that when they realize that this is who makes my living. And if you hear a lot of these people, they didn't intend for it to become a lifetime career. A lot of people start in a rock band as a kid, and you'll see a lot of people from our generation, and almost to every last one, you will hear these very words. In 1964, I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I knew immediately what I wanted to do with my life. And, Joe Walsh from the Eagles has said this. Glenn Frey from the Eagles has said this. Niels Lofgren, who plays with Bruce Springsteen's from Maryland, I've met him, and he has said this. Actually, he was sitting behind us at Meriwether Post Pavilion, and I said to my date, I think I just saw Neil Lofgren. And she said, I think you're crazy. You must be hallucinating. And then it was David Crosby and Graham Nash, and then they invited him on stage. So the guy that had been sitting right behind me all night got invited to play on stage with Graham Nash, David Crosby, and I was right. That had been Nils Lofgren. And they've all made this statement. And he made this statement. I was at an event with him, a very small event, personal event, and he made a statement. He said, I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in 1964, and what they saw the reaction of the young girls, and so all these boys in puberty, and I got to imagine Joe Walsh and Nils and Bruce and all these guys were about between 13 and 15 years old, and they're seeing that these girls are crying and screaming and going nuts over the Beatles. So I guess a shy junior high kid, just starting with interest in girls, sees like, well, if you put a guitar in your hands, you get up and you jump up or down and shake your head, and when a fucking haircut, then all of a sudden you're like kind of a stud muffin. It was real appealing to most of the baby boomer generation to be a rock star. Unquestionably, thousands of garage bands got started being inspired that way by the Beatles, no question about it. Yeah, and a lot of those people turned into be the superstars that we know and love from the 70s. Absolutely. And that's a cool little story that you will find a lot of them refer to that night, and they don't make any bones about it or attempts to hide it at all. And I think that's kind of a cool little story. And a woman on Facebook said that she posted a Beatles song. She said, I'm so grateful to God that I was able to share this period of history with these people, as our musicians. And I kind of feel the same way. What a blessing. And unfortunately, George Harrison and John, they came to tragic ends. But what's that? History, absolutely. Look at the enormous influence that they've wielded for decades and generations later. I mean, they're the first super group. Yeah, and we were lucky enough. I was lucky. I mean, I can remember being 8 years old and wanting a Beatles 45 at the store and bugging my parents for a couple quarters, and then when I got a little older, like about 10, I was buying Abbey Road, the record, and when they busted up, I couldn't believe it, and I was only like 10 or 11 years old, and then the music continued. The music's timeless, and it's a timeless influence on people that have gone on to become superstars, and their music's been covered by millions of people, and Paul McCartney and Ringo are still going strong, and that's a beautiful thing, Dan, let's take a quick moment here. What were you doing when you heard the news
about John Lennon being shot. When you heard John Lennon had been killed, what do you remember about that day?
That was a very bad time in my life, period. I was having relationship difficulty. I remember it very well. It was a cold December day. And it was just utter shock. I think the first thing, we didn't have internets and quicker access to media. One of the first things I was most concerned about was I didn't want to believe it was true. Is it true? Mm-hmm. And then as the day went on, it was it was determined to be absolutely true. And I think all of my friends and everybody I knew that grew up with the Beatles music and fans were just absolutely stunned. And there was a lot of just a lot of sadness. I remember sitting around with a lot of friends just in a circle, just being really sad and feeling very bad that this could happen. That how did this happen? Why did this happen? Who could shoot such a precious, a precious individual that's brought so much joy and represent? John Lennon fought for peace. John Lennon fought against the Vietnam War. John Lennon was on the FBI's surveillance list per Richard Nixon's instructions because they felt that his influence on the youth of America and his stance against the Vietnam War was so strong that he was actually a threat to the United States agenda in Southeast Asia. But his message was stop killing each other. We're all one human race. And, he was a beautiful person and a beautiful artist, and he died being nice. He could have been a really arrogant SOB and ducked David Chapman and got into a cab. But instead he took time out to sign something for him, which was his fatal mistake, and he was shot. And, this man's still alive. I understand that David Chapman is not, or Mark David Chapman, I don't know how, I know his last name's Chapman. I know he's proud of the fact, he still is proud of the fact that he shot John Lennon. He feels that he's made his mark in history, and we can't really talk about John without talking. George was attacked in his own home. And here's the thing that the rest of the Beatles after John's assassination very much lived in fear for a long time about, this kind of thing happening to them. And then one night, a nut broke into George Harrison's house. And between him and his wife, they were able to beat the man into submission and have him arrested. But shortly thereafter, George developed cancer, and Paul McCartney was very close to George because they had grown up as little boys together. And he felt that the attack had weakened George's immune system and will to fight the cancer. And maybe that's speculation or not, but we tend to put people on platforms and deify them, and they're just human beings with talent, and they've got something to share with us. And when there's something like that happens, it's just terribly tragic. And how can you be anything but stunned when something like that happens? Speaking of George, another, I guess, humorous story about meeting people famous was I met Bono Edge by accident because I had to urinate outside the St. Petersburg Arena. We had tickets for the 2001 show, which was about a month. I think it was almost just barely 6 weeks after 9/11. And I was looking for a potty or a porta pot or something outside the arena because, we weren't ready to go in. And a limo almost ran us over, and a whole bunch of people flocked to that end of the arena, and some bouncers came out and said, they're going to come out, but if you start to push and shove, they're going right back in. And sure enough, Bono came out, and I asked him to play In God's Country. I said, look, this is a time where we really want to hear it tonight because of what just happened. And he said, maybe, but he sang as tribute to George Harrison because that night was the night that George had passed away.